Well, we've got an intense, bitter debate in this country. Intense competition between northern and southern states over whether slavery should be allowed into Missouri. And again, I stress this, I've mentioned it many times, and I hate to keep hammering away at the same thing. This is not a debate over whether slavery was good or bad. It was not a debate over whether slavery was consistent with American values. It was not a question of the debate of the morality of slavery. It was a question of economics. For Southerners, it was a matter of wanting to be able to use slaves in Missouri. For Northerners, it was a fear that the use of slave labor would threaten their economic well-being because slaves could produce the wheat at a lower price and they would lose their income, maybe even lose their farms. Well, we've had other situations in American history when there's been a big debate, and we've always managed to find a way to resolve that with a compromise. And that's what we did. The Missouri Compromise of 1820. That was actually hammered out behind the scenes by Henry Clay, who, when we had the big debate over nullification 13 years later in 1833, Henry Clay worked behind the scenes to arrange the compromise tariff of 1833. This is 13 years earlier in his career, but he's already established himself as sort of a master of the art of compromise. There's one other issue here that I haven't mentioned yet, that was why Northerners did not want slavery in Missouri. And it has to do with the number of states. And I don't know if you've been counting the states, but as of 1820, the country had equal numbers of northern states and southern states. And politically, that was very important because it meant that the United States Senate had an equal number of senators from northern states and from southern states. The House of Representatives was another matter. In the House, which is based on population, the North clearly was ahead. The North had more people than the South, so the North had more members of the House of Representatives. And that was an inevitable thing, and that was something you had to accept, and that was not likely to change anytime soon. That meant that the Senate became very important. It became very important to have then equal numbers of slave and free states. And one of the reasons why Northerners did not want Missouri as a slave state was because then the equal numbers, I think it was 13 to 13, would now be out of line. The South would have an extra state. They would have 2 extra members of the Senate. And that was another reason why Northerners did not want to have Missouri admitted as a slave state. Well, to deal with that aspect of the question, that's sort of the simpler one. Henry Clay looked around, and at that time, as of 1820, the state of Massachusetts was kind of weird and had always been this way. There were kind of like 2 chunks of the state of Massachusetts. It's a little weird. If you look at a map of the state of Massachusetts, there's one section here, and then separate from it, not connected to it, there's the states of Vermont and New Hampshire in between, and then up there there's a northern part of the state of Massachusetts, which is kind of weird, didn't make a lot of sense. And the people in that northern part said, why should we still be part of Massachusetts? We're not geographically connected to the rest of it. We don't have much in common with the rest of it. Could we become our own state? And for Clay and the other compromisers in 1820, this was a great idea. Massachusetts didn't want to hold on to that territory. It doesn't really make sense. It had never made sense. It was not logical to have sort of like 2 parts of the state of Massachusetts. Just like make the northern part into the state of Maine. And so the feature of the Compromise of 1820 that dealt with that said that yes, Missouri could become a slave state, but Maine would become a free state So the balance would be the same. Now instead of it being 13-13, it'd be 14-14. The principle of equal voice in the Senate was preserved. So that dealt with part of it. That was one aspect of the whole issue of having Missouri as a slave state, was the whole question of representation and their membership in the Senate. That's been resolved. We're going to have equal numbers of states still. The more troublesome question was admitting what was essentially a northern state as a slave state. It's essentially a state where most of the agriculture is going to be non-cotton, non-slave. Just that one little tiny corner is going to be slave. And that's the real troublesome question. So the decision was reached that we would draw a line across the country, a line that's, the geographic notation is 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, 3630. And that is the southern border of Missouri. This area north of that, except for Missouri itself, the rest of the Louisiana Territory is going to be non-slave. That was the trade-off. Northerners accepted. Missouri itself, Missouri is north of the line. It's basically a northern state, so it's going to sort of stick out there in the division between the north and south. But Missouri will become a slave state, but all the rest of the Louisiana Territory, extending all the way out to the Rocky Mountains and Montana, all of that is going to be non-slave. Only area south of that would become slave states when they were admitted to the Union. Now, if you look at a map, in terms of the number of states involved, the North is getting a much better part of this deal. There's just a lot more territory north of 3630 than there is south of it. You just look at a map and you can see the line 3630 sort of is an extension of the Ohio River. The Ohio River kind of comes along down, dividing the Kentucky from the states like Illinois to the north of it. And it sort of runs into the southern border of Missouri. It's not quite lined up, but it's close enough. So now the line has been drawn. Mason-Dixon line in the east, Ohio River in the territory that we acquired from Britain, 3630 in the Louisiana Purchase, except for Missouri itself, which is going to be slave-free. But there's going to be a lot more territory north of 3630 than south. So essentially what's happening here is that the South is, that there's a compromise, and the South is getting the short run gain. They're going to get a state right now. They're going to get a slave state immediately. They're going to get one more slave state. And they're going to get a state where cotton is basically not going to be growing, but they're going to have it as a slave state. So they're going to get the short run benefit, but in the long run, the North is going to have a lot more states eventually when all the rest of that Louisiana Purchase territory fills in. But who knows how long that's going to be. It's going to be many years before we're going to be settling the other area west of the Mississippi. So for most of the Louisiana Purchase territory, all of those states of Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, Kansas, all of those states, when they're eventually ready, are going to become non-slave states. So, but that's the trade-off. The South gets the short-run advantage, the North gets the long-run advantage. And we settled it. And we've basically continued the line. There's a line that divides the North from the South. It's a line that's based on geography. It's a line that's based on agriculture. Most of the area north of that is non-cotton, so it's non-slave. Slavery is going to be continued in the area south of it, where there is a possibility of growing cotton. So we've settled the question. This is now, as of 1820, we've had the line. We've just extended it. we've extended it for the rest of the Louisiana Purchase. Extended it all the way out to the Rocky Mountains. And basically people are content with that. That's the way that people are accepting that. Northerners are comfortable because it does not threaten them with the competition with slavery. Slavery is going to be limited to the South, where it will be used in cotton, and cotton does not grow in the North, so we don't have to worry about it. And in fact, if you want to look at this, many Northerners are quite comfortable with slavery, because if slavery is used only for cotton, which it is, then that means that cotton is going to be cheap, and cotton products, the textiles that we all wear, will be cheap. We'll get cheap textiles, and it benefits the South. It also benefits northern bankers. Many northern bankers invested in southern banks or in southern landowners, and so there's a lot of northern bankers and northern capitalists who are making money off of slavery. They have investments in cotton plantations. They don't own them themselves, but they have investments that are tied up into Southern finance, and Southern finance revolves around plantations and slaves, and Southern finance is tied to Northern finance. So people make money in the North. Northerners make money from textile, or from cotton, from slavery. And of course, as I mentioned, at least one of the earliest industries in the North was the textile industry, which is all up in the North. It's all up in New England, in the little boony towns up in the hills, away from the cities where there are natural falls for water mills. So, and those textile mills relied upon Southern cotton, and that means they relied upon slave labor. So they're happy with it. They're content with it. No, Northerners are perfectly content to have slavery in this country as long as slaves are not used to raise wheat or other northern products and compete with northern farmers. So it's just a matter of money. It's a matter of economics. People are okay. Now, all along, though, there have been some people who objected to slavery. And these people objected to it on moral grounds. They considered slavery wrong. This is not for them. This is not a question of economics. For the country as a whole, the issue of slavery is an economic question. But in the North, it's this, well, in both North and South, there's this small number of people motivated by, in many cases, religion. Many of them are also active in Christian religious activities. They see slavery as a moral wrong. In fact, probably the main one are people who were not precisely Christians. It was Quakers in Pennsylvania, saw slavery as wrong. They're definitely not in the mainstream. Mainstream people who objected to slavery, as I told you before, crashed on two issues that they could not overcome. They crashed on the issue of, if we got rid of slavery, what would happen to the slaves? And I talked about this earlier. You know, and the answer would be, well, they become free people. What? Well, it's not an issue. They just become like everybody else. And then, you know, they'll live with us, and we'll work together and socialize together. We'll just be a bilingual, or not a bilingual, but a bicultural nation. We'll have white people, we'll have black people, and we'll be friends and neighbors, and we'll just be, that's the way we'll be. But that just was not acceptable. people could not accept the idea of black equality. People could not overcome their basic innate racism. Even